This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hi, and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Teider, and my guest today is Ronit Plank. Ronit is a writer, a teacher, and a host and a producer of a podcast called And Then Everything Changed. Hi, Ronit.
Hi, Anna. How are you?
I'm very good, and I'm very excited about having you here today because, I love the concept of your podcast. It's so amazingly simple and fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
And then I love the story about your mom because I was surprised. Only after I asked you to be my guest, you told me the story about your mom, which is quite an unusual story and very, very interesting. Mm-hmm. So I'm very, very excited to have you here and talk to you today.
Oh, I'm so glad. And I also love your show and your format. And I think it's such an important story, the type of story that you're trying to tell. And I think mom-daughter, mom-son relationships are so pivotal. And I love that you're highlighting them.
Thank you, Ronit. But tell me more about your work. Tell us more about And Then Everything Changed.
Okay, so I'll start with that. So, maybe I can do both. So I used to act when I was in my 20s and in New York and LA. And then when I was acting, I got to work with Tim Robbins at the Actors Gang in LA. And I ended up writing a couple of pieces for theater that I got to perform, which was really fun because they were kind of like sketches, but I got to perform them on the main stage. And then when I had my first kid, we moved to Seattle and I had a second kid. And so I had a daughter and a son. And then I really was longing to create again. And I hadn't been acting. I just, had my kids and I stopped. And I started writing and I started taking classes and I started with fiction. And then I started publishing some of my short fiction. And then I studied nonfiction and started publishing nonfiction. And I got a master's of fine arts in nonfiction at Pacific University. And then I was writing essays and memoir pieces and working on my own memoir, which is finished now. And that is a coming of age memoir about pretty much the loss of my mother to a guru, which we're going to talk about.
Oh, we will.
And in addition to writing, I found that I really enjoyed podcasting. I had a show for a little while with my friend. And so I started this podcast, And Then Everything Changed, based on the idea that most of our lives could be boiled down to pivotal scenes and moments. When I had the idea, I thought that I would talk to guests about if their life was a book, their life was a movie, what scenes would you have to include? And I started thinking about it, and I decided to do the show. And I've been live since October 31st, 2019. And it's a weekly podcast, and I'd say I interview a wide range of people, including survivors, people in recovery, authors, and also people who are leaders or social justice advocates about either their story and really important moments in their life that changed the course of their lives, or things that they've come up with and ways of living and thinking that have changed the path for other people. So, I did an episode recently about rejecting diet culture, but I also interviewed someone who survived Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico and had her own story of what that did to her life and the aftermath. So kind of is the gamut, but I kind of where my instinct or my heart tells me to go. And I try to get that I think listeners would like to hear and experience.
It's so fun. You had me as a guest as well. And the funny thing is, I couldn't stop talking. I had so many moments of, and then everything changed. That I felt bad. I'm like, Ronit, should I tell you this one as well?
Right. There's so many when you start to think about them, and maybe some of us have more of them, right?
We talked about this, yes, how some people have lives that are very straightforward, and some people like me have lives that are complete roller coasters.
Yes, exactly. And I also think that for me too, the And Then Everything Changed moment can also be a smaller, more subtle shift within us that we might recognize later as not having been hugely disruptive, but then somewhere along the line we changed and we evolved, and we can maybe almost see when that started. And that's also something that I like to talk about on my podcast.
But Ronit, let's go to your mom.
Yeah. So sure.
Yes. Tell us about your mom.
Okay. So I will give you the overview. My parents met at a training farm in New Jersey in the late 60s because they were being trained to learn how to operate a communal work farm in Israel called a kibbutz. And a lot of people know the word kibbutz, or they might know the word kibbutz. You got a kibbutz, which is like schmooze with someone. So these communal socialist work farms were built in a way to help support the country and give structure to people in their lives. So when my parents were sufficiently ready, and trained, my father with the livestock, my mom in the kitchen and all that stuff, they shipped off to Israel and they lived there for 8 years. And during the time that they had me and my sister, we lived on Kibbutz Lahav, which was in the desert, the Negev desert. So my father rode tractors and was friends with some Bedouin men. He did service in the army when he was called up to do it. Like he was in the reserves. My mom handled the kitchen, and there were about 250 people living there total. Kids lived separately from their parents. They saw them for a few hours a day, but they lived in the Beit Tinokim, which means children's house. And they had minders there, which were called metapelim, which are people who take care of the kids. So the parents can do the work they need to do for the kibbutz. So essentially, I would eat with my group of kids, which was my age range and was probably 7 or 8 other kids like me. And then I would, do my activities like, nursery school. And I would see my parents a couple hours of the day. And the idea behind it was that the parents were to be freed up for their lives and their work. And then the time they got to spend with their kids would be really concentrated and mindful. So the interesting thing about this, there's complexity to the whole thing, and I could go forever. But one interesting point is that my father liked the idea that the kids couldn't eat in the dining room with the adults, that he didn't understand why he couldn't eat with his daughter. So at one point, he brought me in to eat in the regular dining room, and the other kibbutzniks did not like that at all. He really wanted to be a dad, and he had in mind that he would have many, many children. I think it's important when we tell our parents' stories, and I really hope that when my kids, if they choose to tell my story, will keep in mind my parents' story and my story and how I grew up, because we are kind of made by how we live and how we were raised. And I think there's a lot of texture to the way my parents approached parenthood that differs, but neither of my parents had really good home lives. They're in New York. My mom is from Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn. My father is from the Bronx. No one had a lot of money. We're Jewish, and they were raised really secularly. My father was bar mitzvahed. My mother was not bat mitzvahed. My mother was the second of 3. My dad was the oldest of 2. And my mother's mother did not treat her well. She kind of singled my mother out in a really negative and hurtful way. There was a lot of emotional abuse and I think a little bit of physical abuse. And my mother never felt like she was wanted or she wasn't treated well. And, in my father's house, his father left and he became like the head of the household. So you have these 2 people who come together and they have me and they're living in this socialist work farm where they're really supported. And then they had my sister. Me and my sister are about 2.5 years apart. And then when I was about almost 4, my first language is Hebrew. We moved to Seattle because my father got a graduate study. He got a program in University of Washington. And in Seattle, Washington is where their marriage broke up. Now, in my book, which I hope will be out in not too long, there's a whole bunch of background on this for more information. But essentially, my dad and my mom divorced. My dad moved to New Jersey within the year to follow his dream of becoming a writer, left me and my sister in Washington State with my mom, who up until now had never even written a check in her life because she lived on the kibbutz as a young adult. And here she was in charge of 2 kids on public assistance, no career, no spouse, no partner, no family, And this is the 70s. I was born in 72. So my father's gone. And ironically, he moved to New Jersey to be with his girlfriend and her 2 daughters. So he was essentially becoming their head of household. So my mother grew depressed and she grew kind of ill. I think she probably had some autoimmune and also depression. When her friend mentioned a guru that he was following, she checked it out. And this was Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who has gotten a lot of press in recent years, especially because Netflix did a documentary called Wild Wild Country, which was a multi-part series that, it was a series that covered his ashram in India and then his relocation to Oregon.
I saw it. It was fascinating. And I especially loved reading your views on it. And it was interesting how you write about how they did not cover the children in the... Is it called a commune or what is it called?
Yeah, well, yes, the commune. I mean, it's funny because there's some controversy. Like I call it a cult, but then people, the cult can be a really controversial term in a way because, what makes a religion a cult and what makes it a religion, right? And so there are actual signposts and benchmarks for what a cult is in our definition, in a cultural definition. But people who lived there probably thought it was an ashram, and it was an ashram, but I called it a cult, it's all about your perspective.
It is.
So my mom is, not feeling well. She's alone. She's depressed. And, she never had her childhood. She never had her young adulthood. She never had active rebellion was to Israel with her husband. She married him there. And then she realizes her husband and her are not well matched, that he doesn't support who she is, that he doesn't get her. And probably she wasn't a very good partner either, right? I mean, how can you be a good partner when you've never been shown unconditional love and vulnerability, right? So essentially she goes to check out the guru and these meetings. And then she decides with some inheritance she got from an aunt to go to India. And I'm really giving you the short strokes here because my sister and I, we were little and we went to those meditations. I would look around at all these people in their sunset colored clothing and their malas. And I was like, what is going on?
Wow.
It was excruciating to wait through those ceremonies, and watch that. And it's also really uncomfortable to watch your mom, who is not really expressive anyway with her thoughts and feelings, growing farther away from you.
I was just thinking that it must have been strange seeing her wanting to belong somewhere else that's not you necessarily, even as long as she was still in Seattle.
Well, right. And also I think that this distance, in my thesis for my master's program, I really covered the watchfulness of kids and hypervigilance in kids. And this would probably get classified in that adverse childhood experiences model that so many people are talking about now and recognizing. But hypervigilance, which is what I had and have taken a really long time to kind of tone down, happened for me because I didn't have the sensation of being watched out for. Maybe my mom was watching out for me, but I was a very astute watcher. I mean, I ended up becoming a writer and an actress. So I just came into the world with a lot of vigilance anyway. But when certain kids don't feel like anyone is steering the ship, they're going to jump in full gear, right? So when my mom decided to go to India, she asked my father to take us, and he didn't want to take us because how is he going to fit his two kids in this little apartment in the projects with his new family? But eventually, long story, I'm going to cut it short. We got there for the summer. My mom went to India. One of my earliest memories was our reunion with my father in the airport in Newark and my mom leaving for India,
Wow.
And that's actually how my memoir begins. And so we lived with my father for the summer, and then my mom decided she wasn't coming back. So he quickly enrolled us, me in second grade, public school in Newark. And my mom was gone. She was gone for almost a year. And then when she did come back, she came back for her mother who was dying of breast cancer. And we started seeing my mom on weekends for a couple of years. She settled down and cut her hair and put on makeup again. And because when she came back from India, she had genie pants on and she had a nose ring and she had the mala still. And she had this big fluffy hair and this glow from inside and a jangly anklet that she was wearing full of bells. I was like, whoa, hey mom, what's up? But at the same time, I really want to express that my mom was my North Star. I was my mom's. I lived with my father and he did a really good job in many ways, but my mom was my gift parent. She was the one who I saw all good things coming from, which really was funny and very childlike because she couldn't stay.
It's fascinating you say that. Yeah, because in a way she abandoned you.
Yeah. And yeah, she left. So she left again when I was about 11 and a half. So things seemed a little normal, seemed like maybe things were going to settle down. I was seeing her on weekends, every other weekend. And then she went to the ashram when a woman that she met told her about the relocation of the ashram to Oregon, to Antelope, Oregon. And she went again. And then we got the letter in summer camp. We were at Sleepaway, Jewish nonprofit sleepaway camp, my sister and I, that said, I'm going to stay past the summer. I'm just going to stay here. And it was like the bottom fell out again, Oh. And if anyone who's listening knows what a bar or bat mitzvah is, which is like you turn 13 and you get a rite of passage as a Jew. My mom didn't come to mine. Her family did, my aunts and uncles and stuff. And, so I just pushed through. And, when my mom did come back from the ranch eventually when it broke up, and if you watch Netflix, Wild Wild Country, that would be the last episode or the close to the last episode where everything falls apart. She was there at the end, and that's when it fell apart, and she came running back to New York. But she was not good. She didn't look well, and she was really out of it. And she ended up leaving again and just relocating to Seattle. And we never lived with her again.
What happened to her spirituality after this? Did she?
Well, for years there were Bhagwan books in her apartments. And, I really just couldn't stand looking at his face. I just
the man who took your mom away.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, in my work, I realized, and in my essays that I have published, he didn't take her away, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Like she allowed herself to go. And that's a big, understanding as you get older too. But so we started to see her in the summers, and she was into spirituality. And I always looked at her as someone who had her act together spiritually, which is so funny. For my high school graduation, my gift was a psychic reading. For real. Yeah. She read my tarot cards. She listened to other spiritual leaders. She's read books by people who are kind of those self-actualized, I guess, thought leaders, people who have books that the chapters begin with quotes from their very own lecture. I knew you were going to ask me about spirituality, and I know I answered a question for you in an earlier conversation, and it ties in now, which is that I recently did a podcast episode about spirituality and how angels can be seen and contacted. I had a really lovely guest named Laura Powers in, and she's a clairvoyant, and she was talking about there are angels everywhere. And my mom listened to the episode because she's a big fan of my show. And she said, I listened to your episode and it brought back all my memories of being into all those spiritual things. And she's like, gosh, I was so young then. It just seems so old fashioned now, because she doesn't think that way anymore.
Yeah. She did it 50 years ago. Yes.
Yeah. It's not that she's not looking for a leader, because she still does, whether it's the body positivity movement, health at any size. She's always looking for guidance. I think that some people just never really feel like they understand things unless someone tells them what to do. But I will tell you, she is a much better grandmother and more attentive grandmother than she was a mother.
I had a guest who told me a similar thing, that only through the grandchild did mom manage to express the maternal side of her that she didn't manage to express with her own children, which is fascinating that it can skip a generation.
It's also kind of painful, right? It's a weird thing because, you're watching your kids get something that you didn't. And when my kids were really small, it was hard. I would get a little angry or frustrated, or I didn't want to ruin my kids' illusion, but I wanted to sort of be like, I didn't have that. Like a little brat.
Yeah. But Ronit, let's go into her lessons. I'm very, very curious to hear about her lessons. What have you learned from her and from all of this?
Well, here's the really simple one. This is the first one, which is always use more of the herbs in a recipe than the recipe calls for. So
I love it that you're opening with this one.
Yes, I am, because it's the simplest and it's actually really good. So my mom is a great cook, really good cook, especially old fashioned, Jewish and European cooking, just so good, but also curries and stuff. She was a cook in the kibbutz, and her meals are amazing. And I should mention, I see her every Friday night now for Shabbat. We live 5 minutes away, and she cooks for my family. I mean, except before coronavirus. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would say that one of the things that's taken me a really long time to learn, and I still have to remind myself of, is that the way people act around you often has so much more to do with who they are and not who you are. and this is an indirect lesson, right? So the herb lesson is one she actually told me. The rest of these are I inferred. So for years I thought, what's wrong with me? Why? I mean, not consciously, but if I was better or a better kid or nicer or whatever I was supposed to be, she would stay. And that's a really common trait among kids who don't get with parents. Mm-hmm. So I think it took me a long time to realize that, like, when my mom couldn't stay, it's because she couldn't stay. And I know it sounds so simple to someone who has a good relationship with their mom or a good level of confidence. Even in my 30s, if she seemed like to sort of glaze over when we were talking, or she like would leave without giving me a big hug. She's not like a super warm physical person, like I would just feel sort of lost and sort of like unsatisfied. And it just made me feel bad. And I think the love I have with my husband and how open he is to giving me love and the growth that we've seen in our marriage and my love for my kids, like, shows me like parents are just people who had kids, and a lot of them are not in a position to be good parents. And it doesn't mean, that you did something wrong. And it doesn't mean that if someone is hostile to me or doesn't seem happy that they hate me necessarily. I mean, they might, but it says more about what's going on with them. And that took a long time for me to listen to and hear. Here is another big one, which ties into the spirituality, which is most people don't change, but sometimes when you least expect it, they do. And I think this is really important because here we have my mom who was seeking spirituality all the time and is now kind of laughing at herself, which is hilarious, but also really sad.
I don't think it's sad. I think it's beautiful that people evolve and change.
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic that, you can spend years looking for this something. And unfortunately, she made so many sacrifices looking for it. And then at one point decide this is not it. I'm going to look for something else.
Yes. No, I totally agree with that. And I have to think I'm grateful for my own evolution, because though I want to get tie up that with a bow in a second, but I'll just jump to my last lesson and then I'll go back. I didn't learn how to express myself in a vulnerable way. My father we didn't have that language that a lot of parents these days are using with their kids. Like, that hurts my feelings when you say that, but you're entitled to say it. Or, tell me what's going on. I want to hear what it is. I won't be angry. Like things like that. Mm-hmm. Right. So he was really strong as a father and kind of inflexible in many ways. And I never learned how to fight or not fight in a vulnerable, open way where just because you listen to someone's viewpoint and understand what's bothering them doesn't mean that they're attacking you. And so it was a really long lesson for me in my marriage, and hopefully with my friends too, to be vulnerable and to not have all the answers, and to know when I've messed up, and to know that someone's not going to just give up on me because I made a mistake. I mean, that's a really hard lesson for someone whose parent left. And also I had to grow, and it was painful. I mean, it was really painful to see my own hand in the things that I touched and be someone who had to change, right? But I did. So, and I am, and I'm trying. But in terms of how people do change, to come back to my earlier point, my mom and I have talked through the years, and so has my sister with my mom, about what happened. And we never really had a satisfying conversation about it. And to be fair, there's not a lot she can say, about what happened anymore, because it's over. And I'm not going to spend my life punishing my mom for the way things used to be, right? I'd rather take what I have now and have my life with her. And our relationship has only grown. And I will say we had a conversation recently, just a couple months ago, before we were all quarantined. And I didn't expect it to happen. I didn't know it was going to happen, but we started talking about the past and about why everything happened. And in the middle of our conversation about this, she started to, I felt like she was treading water and trying to come up with some of the older excuses. Oh, well, I had no money, or, oh, I didn't know what I was going to do with you guys, or, oh, and then she just said, I ran away.
Oh.
She said, but that's what I always did. I ran away. Yeah.
Can you imagine how much strength it took to recognize that and to admit it to you?
Yes. And we had a moment there, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing because I never imagined I was going to hear it. And I didn't know it was going to come out that way. And I was so grateful to her. And I felt like she'd grown so much that she could say that.
Mm-hmm.
So people do change a lot.
Some people do change.
Yeah.
Some people never change or don't want to.
Yeah.
Some people don't want to. Yeah, it's as easy as that. But Ronit, you know what's beautiful? That you had this conversation and that you do have your mom in your life now. And that you're working on this and working on recognizing it and accepting it and healing. Because I gently started working on this or even recognized there's something to work on only after my mom left. Passed away. Only then did I recognize how wounded she herself was and how the ways that she treated me often came from that place, from the place of a little girl who lost her mom when she was 6 years old, and her dad when she was 24. And I never really thought about this while she was alive, and I feel bad about that. I just kind of took it for granted. Mom was mom, and only after she passed away and I started working on this book about lessons I learned from her, and I dived deeper, only after I felt what it feels like to lose your mother, did I recognize how hard it was for her and how... Yeah, the way she was treating me came from trying to keep her own head above the water, sometimes emotionally. So
yes,
it's beautiful you guys have done this while she's still here.
I feel very grateful about that. I feel like you can't predict what's going to happen in your life. And I try to be open and see what's what and try to be aware of what I'm doing and try not to put blinders on to the way I'm acting and how that might affect other people. I'm sure I do things that I wish I didn't do, but I'm trying hard to be as vigilant as I can anyway, to be aware,
Ronit, let us try to recap.
Oh, I want to hear what you're going to do.
Okay, so I love the one that you should always use more herbs than the recipe calls for. We learned how to remove oil stains from one of my guests, which was fascinating. So I love it that now we have a practical lesson on cooking.
You could have a whole chapter of practical tips,
yes.
Right? Yeah.
But then the fantastic lesson for everybody, that the way people act towards you has nothing to do with you, actually, but the way they feel about themselves and who they are. Did I put this right?
Yes, very right. Yeah. And
that most people don't change, but there are exceptions, and some people do change when they want to.
Yeah, which is basically, like I said, nothing. But no, I mean, it is a point. It is a point that people can change when you least expect it. And sometimes it's when you're not expecting it that you can see it, right?
Yeah. And then we had the one that I have to learn, which is... to express feelings in a vulnerable or constructive way, which it's a hard one for many people. It's a hard one for me.
It's very hard. I feel like these days, I don't know about you, but I feel like Brene Brown and her work with vulnerability is so ubiquitous. Everyone is always referencing Brene Brown. And yes. I really hope that maybe some of that will seep into, just kind of our culture and the way that we operate as people. And maybe it'll be implemented in some ways that we're in workspaces or in schools, hopefully one day. And so that people won't be so afraid of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. A very, very big lesson. I have to think about that. It's a big one for me. I'm super, 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 super strong always until I explode,
Are you me. Super, 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 super right too?
Oh, yeah,
all the
always.
Time?
Always right and always strong and always, and then I just break down and explode. And that's not that. I got that from my mama.
Okay. She's still alive in you. Yeah.
Definitely. Ronit, thank you so much for being my guest. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you for sharing the amazing story, your mom's story, and the lessons, which are really, really brilliant. I'm very excited about this.
Thank you so much, Anna. I really enjoy talking with you. I feel, as I've told you before, we have tons we can cover. time. So when the lockdown ends, we need to get together for that lunch.
We will definitely. If you have a mama you'd like to share, you could get in touch with me at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider. That's ANATAJDER. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.